I'm going to have that disgusting metal box removed from your property by Friday, and I will bill you for every single cent. That was the first thing Brenda from ever said to me. Not hello, not welcome to the neighborhood. Just a declaration of war, delivered with the smug certainty of a petty tyrant who had never been told no. Her voice, a high-pitched whine that could curdle milk, cut through the quiet morning air. I was standing in my backyard, watching the crane carefully lower the centerpiece of my future, and my past, onto the freshly poured concrete foundation. It was a 20-foot high cube shipping container. To her, it was a disgusting metal box. To me, it was a sanctuary. It was the last promise I had made to my wife. Let me tell you, if you're looking for stories about taking on a power-tripping HOA and winning, you've come to the right place. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because you're not going to want to miss how this plays out. What would you do if someone threatened to destroy the one thing you had left of a loved one? This whole mess started because I bought a house in what I thought was a peaceful suburban paradise. They called it Serenity Estates. The name was a lie, a cruel joke written on a ridiculously ornate sign at the entrance. The community was ruled by an HOA board, and that board was ruled by one person, Brenda from. She was the self-appointed queen of our little fiefdom, and she patrolled the streets in her golf cart like a low-budget dictator, searching for infractions. A blade of grass too long, a garbage can left out an hour past pickup time, a child's bicycle parked askew in a driveway, these were high crimes in Brenda's kingdom. I, however, had committed the ultimate sin. I had introduced something new, something she hadn't personally approved, into her perfectly beige world. I had moved to Serenity Estates 6 months after my wife, Clara, passed away. The old house was too big, too full of memories that ambushed me in every room. I needed a fresh start, a project. Clara had been an artist, a brilliant painter who never got the recognition she deserved. Her dream was always to have a dedicated studio, a place separate from the house where she could make a glorious mess. We had talked about it for years, even sketched out plans. A small, modern space in the backyard, filled with natural light. After she was gone, I found those sketches. Building that studio felt like the only way to keep a part of her with me, to honor the vibrant, creative soul she had been. I was a structural engineer. I knew how to build things that last. The idea of using a shipping container was mine. It was modern, efficient, and structurally sound as a fortress. It was a blank canvas, a steel shell I could transform into something beautiful. Before I even made an offer on the house, I did my due diligence. I spent weeks with the city planning department. I filed for permits, submitted my engineering drawings, and explained the project in excruciating detail. I got everything approved. I even secured a 5-year variance for the structure, signed and stamped by the city. I had a folder an inch thick with legal documents proving my little project was 100% above board. I thought I had all my bases covered. I was wrong. I had completely underestimated the sheer, boundless power of a bored woman with a title. Brenda stood on the edge of my lawn, hands on her hips, her face contorted into a mask of pure indignation. She was a woman who looked permanently wound too tight, as if her floral print blouses were a size too small and cutting off her circulation. "I'm sorry, who are you?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I am Brenda from, president of the Serenity Estates Homeowners Association," she announced, as if presenting her credentials to a peasant. "And you have violated 17 different covenants." 17. It was such a specific, absurd number. "I have all the city permits right here," I said, gesturing toward the folder on my patio table. "It's a fully approved art studio." "I don't care if you have a letter from the president," she snapped. "The HOA covenants supersede city ordinances. And those covenants state, quite clearly, that no temporary structures are allowed." "That thing," she said, waving a dismissive hand at the container, "is a temporary structure. It's bolted to a permanent concrete foundation that goes 4 feet deep," I replied, the engineer in me unable to resist correcting her. "It's about as temporary as your house." Her eyes narrowed. "Sarcasm will not help you. You have until Friday to remove it." She turned on her heel and marched back to her golf cart, leaving me standing in the shadow of my wife's dream. The air, which had felt full of promise just moments before, now buzzed with the static of conflict. This was the inciting incident, the first shot fired in a war I never wanted to fight. I was a man seeking peace, a quiet place to grieve and to build. But Brenda had just made it clear that in her neighborhood, peace was not an option. I tried reason first. I always try reason first. It's the engineer in me. You have a problem, you analyze the variables, you apply logic, and you find a solution. Brenda, however, was a variable I had never encountered. She was immune to logic. That afternoon, I sent a polite, professionally worded email to the entire HOA board, with Brenda carbon copied. I attached scanned copies of every single permit, every city approval, the stamped variance, and the relevant sections of my property survey. I explained the purpose of the structure and reiterated that it was a permanent addition, legally sanctioned and structurally sound. I ended by inviting any of them to come by and see the plans for the finished studio. I wanted them to see the cedar cladding, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the green roof I had designed. I wanted them to see it wasn't a metal box, it was a piece of architecture. The response came less than 10 minutes later, from Brenda's email address alone. Mr. Miller. Your permits are irrelevant. The board has reviewed your case and found you in violation. A fine of $100 per day will be levied against your property until the structure is removed. The first fine has already been posted to your account. I stared at the screen. The board had reviewed my case. It had been 10 minutes. There was no way she had consulted anyone. This was a unilateral declaration from Queen Brenda. The fine was just a power play, a way to show me who was in charge. A deep, slow anger began to uncoil in my gut. This wasn't about a shipping container anymore. This was about a bully. The next day, a notice was pinned to the community bulletin board, the one right next to the pristine, overly chlorinated pool. It was a community standards alert, printed on bright pink paper. It didn't mention my name, but it didn't have to. A reminder to all residents that unsightly industrial materials and temporary storage units are strictly forbidden. Such structures lower property values for everyone and create a blighted atmosphere. The HOA is taking aggressive action to remedy a recent violation. My project. My memorial to my wife. She had just called it blight. I started getting looks from my neighbors. A few sympathetic smiles, but mostly averted eyes and hurried waves. They knew what was happening. They had all seen Brenda's wrath directed at others over trimmed hedges and unapproved mailbox colors. They were scared. They didn't want to get caught in the crossfire. I couldn't blame them, but it was a lonely feeling. The fines kept coming. $100 a day. Every morning, I would get an automated email notification. The amount grew with a sickening consistency. I knew they were unenforceable, a legal gray area at best, but seeing the number climb was a constant, grinding pressure. It was financial harassment, plain and simple. I continued working on the studio. I had to. The welders came and cut out the openings for the massive windows and the sliding glass door. I started framing the interior walls. Every screw I drove felt like an act of defiance. This was my land. This was my house. This was my wife's memory. I wasn't going to let some power-crazed woman in a golf cart take that from me. The escalation came about 2 weeks into the siege. I was on a ladder, installing exterior insulation, when her golf cart screeched to a halt on the street behind my house. This time, she wasn't alone. She had a man with her, a burly guy in a polo shirt with Serenity Estate Security embroidered on it. He looked like a retired bouncer who had lost a few fights. "Mr. Miller," she yelled. "Cease all construction immediately." I looked down at her from the ladder. "On what grounds?" "You are in violation. You are actively compounding your violation," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Frank, you are to witness that he is refusing to comply." The security guard, Frank, just shuffled his feet and looked uncomfortable. I would later learn his name was actually Gary, and he was Brenda's brother-in-law, given a token job. I ignored her and went back to my work. That was a mistake. "I am warning you," she screamed. "If you do not stop, I will be forced to place a lien on your house. We will foreclose and take your property. You will be homeless." It was an empty threat, a ridiculous legal impossibility, but she said it with such venom. The idea of her trying to take the home I had bought to build a new life, however broken, was enraging. But then she delivered the blow that changed everything. I can't imagine what your late wife would think of this monstrosity, she said, her voice dripping with faux pity. Dragging her memory through the mud by building a garbage heap in her name. It's a true disgrace. You are disrespecting her. Time stopped. The sound of my drill faded. The world narrowed to the space between me and that woman. She had taken something sacred, something that was only mine, and twisted it into a weapon to hurt me. She had crossed a line that no decent human being should ever cross. That was the turning point. In that moment, standing on a ladder in the hot sun, I felt the grief and the exhaustion of the past 6 months crystallize into something cold, hard, and sharp. The peace-seeking man was gone. The reasonable engineer was gone. In his place was a man who was going to dismantle Brenda From's little empire, piece by piece. She thought this was a fight about a shipping container. She had no idea. I was going to use my skills not to build, but to deconstruct. I was going to deconstruct her power, her authority, and her life. And I was going to do it with the same precision and methodical planning that I would use to design a skyscraper. She had started a war. I was going to finish it. That night, I didn't work on the studio. Instead, I sat at my dining room table and opened my laptop. The folder of city permits was still there, but I created a new one next to it. I named it Project Brenda. My grief had been a fog, a heavy blanket that muffled my thoughts and slowed my actions. But Brenda's cruelty had been a lightning strike, burning the fog away and leaving behind a terrifying clarity. The objective was no longer to defend my studio. The objective was to remove the source of the rot. I was a structural engineer. My entire career was built on understanding systems, finding their weak points, and predicting how they will fail under stress. The Serenity Estates HOA was a system. Brenda From was its keystone. I just needed to find the cracks. I started with the official documents. I went to the HOA website and downloaded everything: the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and RS, the bylaws, the architectural guidelines. I also downloaded the last 3 years of board meeting minutes and financial statements. I printed everything out, hundreds of pages, and laid them across my table. For the next 2 days, I did nothing but read. I read with a highlighter in one hand and a red pen in the other. I cross-referenced clauses, noted inconsistencies, and flagged every ambiguous phrase. It was tedious, mind-numbing work, but my mind was firing on all cylinders. It felt good to have a mission, a complex problem to solve. I quickly found what I expected. The rules were a tangled mess of legalese, often contradictory and open to broad interpretation. It was a document designed to give the board, and therefore Brenda, maximum power with minimum accountability. But buried deep in the bylaws, I found the first crack. It was a clause about capital improvements. Any project over $10,000 that wasn't routine maintenance required a vote of the homeowners. It was standard stuff. Then I looked at the financial statements. The numbers were neat, tidy, and utterly opaque. Line items like landscaping services, $150,000, or common area maintenance, $85,000. The amount seemed high for a community our size, but without invoices, it was impossible to know for sure. The landscaping company was always the same, Green Pastures LLC. I Googled Green Pastures LLC. The business was registered to an address in the next town over. A quick search of property records for that address revealed the owner. His name was Gary Frum. Brenda's husband. No, wait, her brother-in-law. The same guy she had brought with her as security. My heart started beating a little faster. This was more than just a power trip. This was potential fraud. She was funneling HOA dues to her family. I needed more information. I needed an ally. I thought of my next-door neighbor, Frank. He was a retired police detective, a quiet man who spent most of his days tending his rose bushes. He had given me a few of those sympathetic, knowing glances. He knew how Brenda operated. The next morning, I walked over with a 6-pack of beer and the printout of the financial statement. I found him in his garden, carefully pruning a yellow rose. "Frank," I said, "I need some advice. The kind a detective might give." He straightened up, wiping his dirt-covered hands on his jeans. He looked at the beer, then at my face, and seemed to understand immediately. "Let me guess," he said, his voice a low rumble. It's about the Queen. We sat on his back porch, and I laid it all out. The container, the permits, the harassment, the threat against Clara's memory. And then I showed him the financials and the connection between Green Pastures LLC and Gary Frum. Frank listened patiently, nodding slowly. When I was done, he took a long sip of his beer. I'm not surprised, he said. Brenda's been running this place like her personal piggy bank for years. A lot of folks are unhappy, but they're too scared to speak up. She's vindictive. You cross her, and suddenly you're getting violation notices for the color of your welcome mat. But this feels different, I said. This feels criminal. It is, Frank confirmed. It's called self-dealing. Conflict of interest. Embezzlement, if you can prove she's getting kickbacks. But proving it is the hard part. You need more than just a public record. You need inside information. Invoices, bank statements. He leaned forward, his old cop instincts kicking in. Look, what she's doing to you is personal. But what she's doing to the HOA is a crime against all of us. She's stealing our money. If you're going to take her on, you can't make it about your studio. You have to make it about the money. That's the one thing everyone understands. He gave me a piece of advice that became the cornerstone of my strategy. Bullies like Brenda, they feed on emotion. They want you to yell, to get angry. It makes them feel powerful. Don't give her that. Be calm. Be methodical. Use facts like a hammer. And document everything. Every email, every conversation, every notice. Create a paper trail so long and so clear that no one can ignore it. As I walked back to my house, I felt a new sense of purpose. Frank was right. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a fight for the whole neighborhood. And I had just found my first ally. The investigation had yielded its first major discovery. Brenda wasn't just a tyrant, she was a crook. And crooks always leave a trail. My job was to find it. My plan began to form, a multi-phase project with a clear objective. Phase 1 was complete, investigation and weakness identification. The weakness was her greed. Phase 2 was setting the trap. I needed to bait Brenda into overstepping her authority in a way that was undeniably, publicly, and legally documented. My professional life was about managing risk and ensuring compliance with codes. I decided to treat Brenda as a faulty structure. I would apply precise, measured stress until she collapsed under the weight of her own corruption. The first step was to install cameras. Not just the usual doorbell camera, but high-definition, audio-capable, discrete cameras covering my entire property. One focused on the driveway, one on the front door, one on the side yard, and a fourth with a perfect, clear view of the art studio and the back fence. I spent a weekend running wires through the attic, making sure the installation was clean and undetectable. The system fed into a secure server in my office, backing up to the cloud. From that point on, every time Brenda or her brother-in-law/security guard set foot on my property, they would be on camera. The next step was to engage her on my terms. Frank's advice echoed in my head, use facts like a hammer. I drafted a formal letter, not an email. I sent it via certified mail with return receipt requested to the HOA's official address, addressed to the Serenity Estates Board of Directors. This created a legal record of communication that Brenda couldn't just delete or ignore. The letter was a masterpiece of calm, infuriating logic. I acknowledged receipt of the daily fines. I then politely requested that the board cite the specific article and section of the CC and RS that my permanent, city-approved structure was violating. I attached, for the third time, all my permits. I also included a preliminary budget for the finished studio, showing its value as a property improvement, and a letter from a certified real estate appraiser stating that a custom art studio would likely increase, not decrease, my home's value. Finally, I asked a series of pointed questions about the association's finances. Citing the bylaw that required homeowner votes for capital improvements, I asked for a detailed breakdown of the landscaping budget for the past 3 years. I asked for copies of the invoices from Green Pastures LLC. I asked for the minutes of the board meeting where that contract was approved. I knew she would be the one to read it. I knew it would feel like a personal attack. I was poking the bear, but I was doing it from behind a wall of meticulously constructed legal paperwork. I was baiting the trap with facts. While I waited for the inevitable explosion, I continued my own research. I created a spreadsheet. In one column, I listed every line item from the HOA budget. In the next, I researched the average market rate for that service in our area. I called 3 different landscaping companies for quotes on maintaining a property the size of our common areas. All 3 came back with estimates that were, on average, 40 to 50% lower than what Green Pastures LLC was charging us. The numbers were damning. Over the past 3 years, our HOA had overpaid for landscaping by nearly $200,000. Money that was going directly into the pocket of Brenda's family. I added a new tab to my spreadsheet, potential restitution. I also started talking to my neighbors, but not about Brenda. I talked to them about their gardens, their kids, the weather. I became a friendly, quiet presence. I wanted them to see me not as the crazy container guy, but as a reasonable person. I let them bring up the HOA. When they did, I would just listen, nodding sympathetically as they told their own stories of Brenda's petty tyranny. She fined me because my hose wasn't coiled in a perfect circle, one woman told me, rolling her eyes. She tried to make me dig up the rose bushes my wife planted before she died, Frank had told me. Said they weren't on the approved list of flora. That was the first time I had to remind her I spent 30 years as a homicide detective. A picture was forming of a community held hostage. They were all paying the price for her control, both in freedom and in dollars. They just needed someone to show them the way out. The certified letter was delivered on a Tuesday. The explosion came on Thursday. I was inside the studio, planning the electrical layout, when I heard her voice, amplified and distorted by a cheap megaphone. Mr. Miller. You are in violation of community rules. Cease your illegal construction. I walked outside. Brenda was standing on the sidewalk, holding a megaphone. Her face was flushed, a blotchy red. She looked like she was about to pop. My high-definition cameras were capturing it all in crystal clear 4K, with directional audio. Good morning, Brenda, I said calmly. Did the board have a chance to review my letter? Your letter was an act of harassment, she screeched through the megaphone, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Neighbors started peeking out their windows. You have no right to question the board's finances. We are a private entity. Actually, under state law, every homeowner has the right to review financial records, I said, my voice deliberately low and conversational. I'm just exercising my right. Did you find the specific covenant I'm violating? The violation is obvious, she bellowed. You are destroying this community with your trash. Then she did exactly what I had hoped she would do. She lost control. She marched onto my lawn, right past the small, private property sign I had recently installed. She strode up to the studio and slammed her open palm against the steel wall. The clang was satisfyingly loud. I will have this torn down, she screamed, her face just inches from my camera's lens. I don't care about your fake permits or your lawyer letters. I am the law in Serenity Estates. I just stood there, silent, letting her dig her own grave. She ranted for another 2 minutes, a glorious, unhinged tirade full of threats, insults, and legally actionable statements. She threatened to triple the fines, to sue me into bankruptcy, to have my car towed from my own driveway. It was a spectacular self-immolation, and I had it all on tape. When she finally ran out of steam, her chest heaving, I gave her a small, calm smile. Thank you for your input, Brenda, I said. I'll be sure to present this at the next board meeting. Have a wonderful day. The look on her face as she processed my words, the calm, dismissive tone, was priceless. The trap hadn't just been baited. It had been sprung. She just didn't know it yet. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the first Tuesday of the month. I had 2 weeks to prepare. The video of Brenda's meltdown on my lawn was the centerpiece of my presentation, but I needed to frame it correctly. It couldn't look like a personal vendetta. It had to be about process, rules, and fiduciary responsibility. I spent my evenings editing the video. I clipped out the most damning statements, I am the law in Serenity Estates, and her threat to tear down my legally permitted structure. I added subtitles for clarity. I also used my engineering software to overlay a diagram of my property line on the video, clearly showing her trespassing. The final product was a concise, 3-minute compilation of pure, unfiltered tyranny. Then I prepared a simple PowerPoint presentation. The first slide was a photo of my city-stamped permits. The second was the text of the state law regarding homeowner access to HOA financial records. The third was a simple bar chart comparing the quotes I had received from other landscaping companies against the amount we were paying Green Pastures LLC. The numbers spoke for themselves. The final slide was just a question, in big, bold letters: who does our board work for? Frank helped me rally a few of the more disgruntled neighbors. We didn't tell them the full extent of what I had discovered. We just said I was going to formally challenge the fines against me and ask some tough questions about the budget. It was enough to ensure there would be more than just the usual handful of residents at the meeting. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was more crowded than I had ever seen it. At least 30 people were there, a significant turnout. They sat with their arms crossed, a nervous energy filling the room. Brenda and the other two board members, a timid man named Arthur who served as treasurer and a woman who never spoke, sat at a folding table at the front. Brenda beamed, clearly misinterpreting the large crowd as a show of support for her crusade against me. She opened the meeting with a triumphant speech about upholding community standards and protecting property values from rogue elements. It was all I could do not to laugh. When the floor was opened for new business, I was the first to stand up. Mark Miller, 214 Willow Creek Lane, I said, my voice steady. I'm here to discuss the $4,200 in fines that have been improperly levied against my property. Brenda's smile vanished. Improperly? Mr. Miller, you are in flagrant violation. According to which specific section of the CC and RS? I interrupted, keeping my tone polite but firm. She sputtered, unprepared for a direct challenge in a public forum. It falls under the General Nuisance Clause and the rules against temporary structures. As I've documented in my certified letter to the board, which I have yet to receive a formal response to, the studio is a permanent structure, I said. And as for the nuisance clause, I'd be happy to discuss that. I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. The first slide, showing my permits, filled the screen. A low murmur went through the crowd. Most of them had only heard Brenda's side of the story. These are the city-issued permits for my studio, I explained. The project was fully approved before I even broke ground. The city also granted a 5-year variance, which is a matter of public record. Brenda's face was turning a familiar shade of blotchy red. City permits do not override HOA covenants. You're right, they don't, I agreed, surprising her. Which is why it's so important that the board correctly identify the covenant being violated. Since the board has been unable to do so, these fines are baseless. I clicked to the next slide. Now, I'd like to play a short video of my most recent interaction with President from regarding this matter. I hit play. The room fell silent as the video of Brenda, megaphone in hand, appeared on the screen. People gasped when she screamed, "I am the law in Serenity Estates." They flinched as she slammed her hand against the studio wall. When the video ended, the silence was thick with shock and disapproval. I had revealed the first piece of damning evidence, and her social credibility began to crack like cheap concrete. Brenda shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is an invasion of my privacy. That video is edited. It's fake. He's a liar. The raw, time-stamped footage is available for anyone who'd like to see it, I said calmly. And the audio is quite clear. You threatened to destroy my private property and made numerous other statements that suggest a fundamental misunderstanding of the limits of your authority as board president. How dare you, she shrieked. I have worked tirelessly for this community. I will not be slandered by this troublemaker. I will sue you for defamation. Her rage was exactly what I had expected. She was losing control, proving my point for me. She hadn't lost her power yet, not by a long shot, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. Her neighbors had seen the mask slip. They had seen the hysterical, irrational tyrant beneath the carefully crafted image of a concerned community leader. The trap had sprung. And as she stood there, trembling with fury, I knew she was about to make her next, and most critical, error. She was cornered. And cornered animals always get vicious. The fallout from the HOA meeting was immediate and severe. Brenda was publicly humiliated, and she reacted not with introspection or apology, but with pure, unadulterated vengeance. The petty tyrant had been wounded, and now she was lashing out with everything she had. The conflict escalated from a neighborhood squabble to a campaign of vicious, personal destruction. The day after the meeting, the daily fines against my property doubled to $200. The official notice, slipped under my door, cited my uncooperative and hostile attitude as the reason. It was absurd and legally meaningless, but it was a clear message. Then the real attacks began. Brenda took to the neighborhood's private Facebook group, a forum she moderated with an iron fist. She posted a long, rambling screed about me. She didn't just call my studio an eyesore anymore. She began to invent things, building a narrative that painted me as a dangerous outsider. She claimed I was running an illegal commercial welding business out of my backyard, citing the industrial equipment she had seen. She warned that the fumes and noise were a health hazard to the community's children. She suggested, with absolutely no evidence, that I might be storing hazardous materials inside the container. It was a masterclass in fear-mongering. Comments poured in, mostly from her loyal sycophants. "This is shocking. Thank you for protecting us, Brenda. We need to get him out of our neighborhood." I printed out every post, every comment. My Project Brenda folder was getting thicker. She didn't stop there. She began filing official, false complaints with every city and state agency she could think of. In the span of 1 week, I received visits from the city code enforcement officer, a fire marshal, an inspector from the Environmental Protection Agency, and even an agent from the state's business licensing board. Each visit was the same. A polite but weary official would show up at my door, holding a copy of Brenda's complaint. I would calmly invite them in, offer them a coffee, and show them my permits. I would walk them through the studio, showing them the residential-grade wiring, the lack of any hazardous materials, and the fact that there was no commercial equipment anywhere on the premises. Every single one of them left after clearing me of any wrongdoing. The fire marshal actually complimented my wiring. The EPA inspector laughed when he saw my small, non-toxic collection of acrylic paints. "This is what she called a hazardous materials depot," he asked, shaking his head. "Ma'am, I've seen scarier things in a kindergarten classroom." It was a massive waste of time and taxpayer money, and it was deeply stressful. But with each cleared inspection, my case against her grew stronger. I had a growing pile of official reports that proved her complaints were not just wrong, but malicious and knowingly false. She was abusing public resources to harass me. The worst part was her attempt to get me fired. She somehow found out where I worked. She called my firm's head office and spoke to the HR department. She told them one of their senior engineers was engaged in illegal construction, was a menace to his community, and was exhibiting unstable and threatening behavior. My boss, a good man I had known for 15 years, called me into his office. He looked more embarrassed than concerned. "Mark, I have to ask. What the hell is going on?" I spent an hour explaining everything. I showed him the video. I showed him the cleared inspection reports. By the end, he was shaking his head in disbelief. "This woman is unhinged," he said. "Don't worry, Mark. Your job is safe. We'll have our legal team send her a cease and desist letter. If she contacts us again, we'll pursue her for harassment." Her attack on my livelihood was a serious escalation, but it was also a gift. Now, her vendetta was documented in my employment file. She was creating a trail of evidence that spread far beyond the borders of Serenity Estates. I knew she was getting desperate. Her authority had been challenged, and her usual tactics of intimidation weren't working. She was flailing, making mistakes. But I still needed the final piece of the puzzle. I needed undeniable proof of her financial crimes. I had strong circumstantial evidence, but I needed the smoking gun. And then, it came to me. It was a Tuesday night, almost 2 weeks after the disastrous HOA meeting. I was working late in my home office when I heard a soft knock on my front door. It was nearly 10 p.m., too late for a casual visitor. I checked my security camera feed. Standing on my porch, looking nervous and clutching a manila envelope, was Arthur, the HOA treasurer. I opened the door. "Arthur? Is everything okay?" "Mr. Miller," he stammered, his eyes darting around as if he expected Brenda to leap out of the bushes. Can I come in for a moment? This is important." I led him to my dining room table, the same table that now served as my war room. He sat down, placing the envelope on the table as if it were a bomb. "I can't do it anymore," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What she's doing. It's not right. It was one thing when it was just, fudging the numbers a little on the landscaping. But what she's doing to you, the lies she's telling. And now she's planning a special assessment. She wants to charge every homeowner $5,000 for emergency repairs to the clubhouse roof." He took a shaky breath. "There's nothing wrong with the roof, Mr. Miller. I saw the inspection report myself. She's just trying to build up the slush fund. I think she's planning to pay her legal fees out of it when you sue her." My blood ran cold. She was going to force the entire community to fund her personal war against me. "I'm an accountant," Arthur continued, his voice filled with shame. "I have a professional code of conduct. I can't be a party to fraud. I'll lose my license. I could go to jail." He pushed the manila envelope across the table toward me. "These are copies," he said. "Of everything. The real invoices from Green Pastures. The bank statements from the shell corporation she set up to receive the kickbacks. It's called B.F. Enterprises. Can you believe the arrogance? Her own initials." He had also included emails between Brenda and her brother-in-law, discussing how to inflate the costs and pad the invoices. It was all there, in black and white. It was the final, undeniable proof. The whistleblower had delivered the bomb. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. "You're doing the right thing. You're a brave man. Just stop her," he pleaded. "Before she ruins us all." After he left, I sat for a long time, just looking at the documents. This was it. This was the key. This went far beyond HOA violations. This was wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. These were felonies. The next morning, I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call the local police. Brenda was a small-time crook who thought she was a queen. I was going to bring the weight of a much higher authority down on her. I picked up the phone and called the district attorney's office. I told the woman who answered that I had documented evidence of significant, long-term financial fraud being committed by a homeowners association president. They scheduled a meeting for the next day. The final escalation was over. The endgame was about to begin. The meeting at the district attorney's office was like stepping into a different world. It was a world of quiet professionalism, where facts mattered and emotions were irrelevant. I sat in a conference room with a young, sharp-eyed assistant district attorney and a seasoned forensic accountant. I didn't start with the story of my art studio or Brenda's harassment. I started with the numbers. I laid out my spreadsheet, the bank statements from B.F. Enterprises, the fraudulent invoices from Green Pastures LLC. I walked them through the scheme, step by step, showing how Brenda had systematically embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from the homeowners she was supposed to represent. The forensic accountant whistled softly. "This is incredibly well documented," he said, looking at me with a newfound respect. "You've done 90% of our work for us." Only then did I provide the context. I showed them the video of Brenda's tirade. I gave them the stack of cleared inspection reports from her false complaints. I provided the cease and desist letter from my employer's legal team. I gave them Arthur's name as the whistleblower, and they assured me he would be granted immunity for his cooperation. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, the ADA was smiling. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who has just been handed a particularly juicy meal. "Mr. Miller," she said, "we're going to take this case. But I'm going to ask for your patience. A case like this requires a careful approach. We need to secure warrants, subpoena bank records to get the originals. We want this to be airtight. Can you give us a few weeks?" "I can," I said. "But she's about to push through a fraudulent $5,000 special assessment on every homeowner. Is there a way to stop that?" The ADA thought for a moment. "The best way to stop it is to let her think she's getting away with it. Let her call the meeting. Let her propose the vote. A public attempt to commit further fraud will only strengthen our case against her." She looked at me. "I have an idea. Can you engineer a situation where this vote takes place in a controlled environment? A final showdown, so to speak." A slow smile spread across my face. Could I engineer a final showdown? I had been planning it for weeks. I used the HOA's own bylaws against her. A provision allowed homeowners to call a special meeting if they could get signatures from 10% of the residents. With Frank's help, we got them in 2 days. We drafted a formal petition to discuss the proposed special assessment and the overall financial health of the association. Brenda couldn't refuse to hold the meeting. We scheduled it for a Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. I made sure to frame the meeting in a way that would appeal to Brenda's ego. I leaked through a neighbor that I was planning to publicly apologize for causing trouble, hoping it would lower her guard. Then, I made some calls. I called the local news channel's investigative reporter, the one who had a reputation for covering suburban corruption. I told him I had a story about HOA fraud that was going to break in a very public way. I invited him to the meeting. I called the city councilwoman who represented our district. I told her a large group of her constituents was concerned about fraudulent activity in their HOA and asked if she would be willing to attend as an observer. She agreed. My last call was to the ADA. I told her the time and place. She promised they would be ready. The night of the final showdown, the clubhouse was packed. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the walls. The news reporter was there with a cameraman, setting up discreetly in the back. The city councilwoman sat in the front row, a notepad in her lap. Brenda arrived, flanked by her 2 silent board members. She looked triumphant, radiant with victory. She saw the cameras, the councilwoman, the massive crowd, and she thought it was all for her. She thought she had won. She thought I was about to be publicly humiliated. She opened the meeting. As you all know, she began, her voice dripping with condescension, we are here to discuss a necessary special assessment to cover critical repairs. But before that, I believe Mr. Miller has something he'd like to say. All eyes turned to me. I walked slowly to the front of the room, my laptop in my hand. I connected it to the projector. Thank you, Brenda, I said, my voice calm and clear. I do have something to say. But it's not an apology. I clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared on the screen. It was the logo of the district attorney's office. A collective gasp went through the room. Brenda's face went from smug to confused to horrified in the space of 3 seconds. For the past several weeks, I announced, my voice filling the stunned silence, I have been working with the DA's office to investigate a significant and prolonged pattern of fraud, embezzlement, and self-dealing perpetrated by our board president, Brenda Frum. I systematically, calmly, presented the entire case. I started with the landscaping contract. I showed the inflated invoices next to the market rate quotes. I put the incorporation documents for Green Pastures LLC and B.F. Enterprises on the screen, showing the clear family connections. I displayed the bank statements, with highlighted lines showing the kickbacks. With each slide, the mood in the room shifted. Confusion turned to shock, shock turned to anger. People were looking at their neighbors, whispering, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. They were realizing that their money, thousands and thousands of their dollars, had been stolen. Brenda was frozen, her mouth hanging open. She was speechless. I moved on to the harassment. I played the video of her on my lawn, screaming that she was the law. I showed the stack of official, cleared inspection reports from her false complaints. I read aloud the email from my company's lawyer regarding her attempt to get me fired. This was never about a container, I said, turning to face the crowd. It was about what happens when we give one person unchecked power. It was about what happens when we stop paying attention. She thought she was untouchable. She was wrong. Finally, I addressed the special assessment. The emergency roof repair is a lie, I said. It is a last-ditch effort to steal another $150,000 from this community before the house of cards collapsed. That's when Brenda finally broke. The public meltdown was even more spectacular than I could have hoped for. Lies, she shrieked, her voice a raw, ragged sound of pure panic. It's all lies. He forged those documents. He's the criminal. He's trying to destroy our community. She lunged toward me, trying to grab my laptop, her face a grotesque mask of fury. But before she could reach me, the clubhouse doors swung open. 2 uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothes detectives from the DA's office stepped inside. The room fell utterly silent. One of the detectives, a calm, grim-faced woman, walked directly up to Brenda. "Brenda she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "you are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and embezzlement." Brenda stared at her, then at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her entire world was collapsing in a matter of minutes. As the officers moved to cuff her, she made one last, desperate attempt to assert her long-gone authority. "You can't do this," she screamed, struggling against them. "I am the president. I run this place." Then her eyes found mine across the room. The hatred in them was pure and potent. "You," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper as they led her away. "You'll pay for this. I'll destroy you." It was her final, impotent threat. As the doors closed behind her, leaving a stunned and silent community in her wake, I felt not triumph, but a profound sense of relief. The storm had finally broken. The war was over. The aftermath of Brenda's public arrest was chaotic, but in a cleansing way. It was like a forest fire had swept through Serenity Estates, clearing out all the rot and undergrowth, leaving fertile ground for new growth. The news report aired that night, leading the 11 o'clock broadcast. It was brutal. The reporter used clips from my presentation, footage of Brenda's meltdown, and the dramatic video of her being led away in handcuffs. My name was mentioned, but I was portrayed as a quiet resident who had simply uncovered the truth. The story wasn't about me, it was about the abuse of power. Serenity Estates became a local cautionary tale. In the days that followed, the community began to heal. Frank, the retired detective, stepped up as the interim HOA president. His first act was to call an emergency meeting, not in the clubhouse, but as a casual barbecue in the community park. People who had been afraid to speak to each other for years were suddenly talking, sharing their own stories of Brenda's reign of terror. It was a collective unburdening. The board was dissolved and reformed. Arthur, the treasurer who had been my whistleblower, was unanimously elected to his old post, this time with a mandate for complete transparency. We hired a new, independent management company. The corrupt contract with Green Pastures LLC was terminated immediately. The new landscaping company we hired cost 40% less and did twice the work. Our lawns had never looked better. The special assessment was, of course, cancelled. In fact, once the new board got a clear picture of the finances, they found the reserve funds were so depleted by Brenda's theft that we were in danger of insolvency. But instead of another assessment, they presented a clear, honest plan to rebuild the funds over time. For the first time, people felt like their HOA was working for them, not against them. As for Brenda, her downfall was absolute. The case against her was overwhelming. Faced with a mountain of evidence, she pleaded guilty to multiple felonies. The judge was not lenient. He made an example of her. She was sentenced to 5 to 7 years in state prison. The court also ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA, a figure totaling over $300,000. Her house went up for sale to cover the legal fees and the restitution payments. Her husband divorced her. Her name became a punchline in the local community. She lost her power, her money, her freedom, and her social standing. It was a complete and total ruin, a fate she had engineered entirely by herself. With the chaos subsiding, I finally turned my full attention back to the art studio. With no one to harass me, the work went quickly. I installed the floor-to-ceiling glass doors, clad the exterior in warm red cedar, and planted the green roof. It transformed from a metal box into a stunning piece of modern architecture. My neighbors, who once averted their eyes, now stopped by to admire it. They brought housewarming gifts for the studio, a plant, a comfortable chair, a set of good brushes. They were no longer afraid. They saw the studio not as a violation, but as a symbol of the stand we had all, in our own way, finally taken. They saw it as a monument to the restoration of peace. One sunny Saturday afternoon, a few months after Brenda's sentencing, I was finally done. I moved Clara's old easel into the center of the room, right where the sunlight was best. I set up her paints, her canvases, her tools, just as she would have liked them. The space was quiet, filled with light, and smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. I sat in the chair my neighbors had given me and looked at the unfinished canvas on the easel. It was the last piece Clara had been working on. For months, I hadn't been able to look at it without feeling a crushing wave of grief. But now, sitting in the studio I had built for her, the studio I had fought for, I felt something different. I felt peace. I thought about the whole ordeal. I had never wanted a fight. I was just a man trying to keep a promise to his wife. But Brenda, in her arrogance and greed, had forced me to become something else. A strategist. A fighter. An agent of a very specific, and very personal, kind of justice. It was poetic justice, I suppose. She tried to tear down a structure I was building, and in the end, her own life was the only thing that was deconstructed. She weaponized the rules to control others, and I used the rules to deliver her to the consequences of her own actions. She built her kingdom on a foundation of lies and intimidation, and I showed everyone that a structure like that can't stand. It will always collapse under its own weight. My community was better now. Safer. More honest. I was a part of it in a way I never expected to be. I was no hero. I was just a husband who had protected his wife's legacy. And in doing so, I had finally found a quiet place to start my own next chapter. The art studio was finished. My return to peace was complete.